abandoned Christian churches were often used by the Turkish army as target practice for artillery. And in this situation, while in most Arab countries,
that's whoa. Okay,
that claim
guys, it's your favorite freaking I don't know, your favorite Bajan.
Most the 1970s are a forgettable decade.
That's what I am, a Bajan.
Is associated with crooked politicians, economic decline, the Vietnam War, the end of fascism, heroin, and music that one could at best call an acquired taste. However, the 1970s also represent a significant socio-political shift on a global level. Previous decades had been decades of left-wing insurrection, revolution in culture, politics and economics, and the challenging of traditional social norms that came to a climax in 1968. In comparison, the 1970s, in particular the year 1979, were the years of the conservative counter-revolution, which led to the new conservative movements of the 1980s that in some ways still last to this day. The election of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, and Helmut Kohl's election, which would drive a conservative market libertarian revolution throughout most of Europe and North America. Pope John Paul II's visit to Poland, which would end up being a substantial nail in the coffin of communism as the Soviet Union fell into an era of stagnation. A whole strew of military dictatorships
how did that
in America
cause
would bring a sudden and violent end to the various socialist South American experiments of the 50s and 60s. The overthrowing of various socialist African regimes by right-wing generals, ushering in an era of corrupt nationalist dictators from the Congo to Equatorial Guinea to Uganda to Togo to Ethiopia. The rise of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, who would end the Arab socialist experiments of his predecessors, which coincided in North Africa with the brutal Moroccan regime under Hassan II, which conducted mass arrests, torture and executions intent to purge the country of all left-leaning political thought, as well as the build-up of an increasingly brutal and corrupt police state in Tunisia under its security minister Ben Ali, who through being in charge of the secret police was the de facto ruler of Tunisia long before he became prime minister. The rise of Deng Xiaoping as head of the Communist Party of China, which brought the liberalization of markets, privatizations in the economy, and the distancing from revolutionary socialist Marxist doctrine with a return to more traditional Chinese social and family values. Similar to much of Latin America and Africa, many Southeast Asian countries also fell into the hands of brutal right-wing strongmen, while in Pakistan, the military dictator Zia al-Haq would engage in a social experiment of extensive Islamization that would have far-reaching consequences.
Damn, this period was freaking insane. I never realized that. Yo, I always thought like the 60s and 70s, I always thought it was kind of just like a tame period. But then again, nah, bro, this is like height of the Cold War type of ordeal, so I don't know, it's pretty ignorant of me to think about it.
That global trend by electing decidedly left-wing leaderships. And the Middle East was also about to undergo a massive transformation into becoming a more conservative place. When we think of the Middle East today, we think of it as a region of religious fanatics, a place where Islam rules over people's lives, where democratic values don't really exist, a place where secularism is a fantasy and religious-based bigotry is widespread.
Yeah.
But this was not always the case.
Proud projection. The Middle East is kind of diverse, to be honest. The Middle East is kind of diverse because you have like Dubai, which is like Muslim, but in practice it's like, it's kind of, I mean, like it is, but it's more like tame. UAE in general is just like that. Then you have Turkey, which is extremely secular. Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is pretty modern. I mean, it's not really primitive. It does enforce stuff like, we all know that. Iran is like in between. Honestly, like just put propaganda aside, like BS Western propaganda aside, and if you look at Iran is pretty like in the middle. So I don't know what Kraut is talking about here. It's only countries that are like in civil wars, Syria, Iraq had to deal with Daesh, aka ISIS, but I don't know, Iraq, ever since America invaded that place, it just, yeah, I don't know, man. Iraq just needs some help. Like, freaking, I personally think Iraq would be better under the sphere of Iran, to be honest. Same with Syria too. But Syria recently just had a government change, so I don't know. Syria, the civil war in Syria is supposed to be over, but there's so much nuance to it that I don't even know yet. The sanctions got lifted on Syria, I think. So who knows what will happen in Syria? I'm still looking at Syria. Then there's that Hebrew state. As much as, you know, people don't like it, it's pretty modern. Not really primitive. Lebanon, I don't know much about Lebanon to really comment on Lebanon. All I know is that it's had a bunch of problems with wars. And Hezbollah. What else is in the middle? I think that's about it in the Middle East I could think of. Yemen is in a civil war. Oman is just, yeah, Oman, I think Oman and Yemen are the only like two places that are kind of like, yeah, you know what I mean, like kind of like, I'm not saying that to be like rude, but just kind of like, yo, stay away from this place like fully, you know what I mean? So no, this is, you see, the thing with Kraut is that Kraut projects a lot of himself so much, like it's not even a joke, and you could kind of see like how he really thinks about this region. Like who thinks this? Who actually like this is such a stereotype cope. It's such a big projection. Honestly, like this is just racial profiling. Literally. Like you really see the type of person Kraut truly is. Although a lot of people who have called him out on it, again, this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to react to his stuff, but people kept asking me to do it, so I was like, okay, I'll do it. But just pointing that out.
When the colonial rule collapsed, the peoples of the Middle East set out on a journey to define who they were. And many of these journeys were done by abandoning the old world with its old ways.
في سنة 53 كنا نريد فعلا مخلصين ان احنا نتعاون مع الاخوان المسلمين على ان يسيروا في الطريق الصحيح والطريق السليم. وقابلت المرشد العام للاخوان المسلمين وقعد وطلب مطالب. طلب ايه؟ اول حاجة قال لي يجب ان تقيم الحجاب في مصر وتخلي كل واحدة تمشي في الشارع تلبس طرحة. كل واحدة تمشي.
Honestly though.
وأنا قلت له يعني إذا الواحد قال هذا الكلام بيقولوا رجعنا لأيام الحاكم بأمر الله اللي كان بيخلي الناس ما يمشوش بالنهار ويمشوا بالليل. أنا في رأيي إن كل واحد في بيته هو اللي ينفذ هذا الكلام. فقال لي لا، أنت باعتبارك الحاكم مسؤول. قلت له يا أستاذ أنت ليك بنت في كلية الطب مش لابسة طرحة ولا حاجة، ما لبستهاش طرحة ليه؟ إذا كنت أنت مش قادر تلبس إذا كنت أنت مش قادر تلبس بنت واحدة اللي هي بنتك طرحة، عايزنا ننزل ألبس 10 مليون طرح في البلد نفس.
Let's talk about that for a second. Oh my goodness, women should cover themselves, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's funny to me how I'll see people say like, oh, women need to have this restriction, women need to have that restriction. But like, no one really talks about this. How about just like raise your sons properly? Literally, just raise your sons properly. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, yeah, you definitely like raise your daughters properly, but no one really like highlights the fact that you need to raise your sons properly too. Like, no one is not saying that at all. Like, seriously, raise your sons to not freaking dehumanize women. Raise your sons to treat women properly. I'm not saying to simp for a woman. Hell no. The only woman you should simp for is your wife and your mom and your sister. Even then, your wife, that could be questionable sometimes. But I'm just saying, like, I said this before, dude. Like, oh my goodness gracious me. Like, there's this big hypersexualization of women in freaking recent times, and it's annoying as shit. But at the end of the day, we still live in a patriarchy, which is a male-dominated society. And the only reason why this is happening is, well, because we live in a patriarchy. Oh my goodness. Like society has always been a freaking male dominated. That is a fact. Men have always been a dominant gender. I'm not saying that men are oppressing women. I mean, in some places that unironically does happen, unfortunately. But I'm just saying that overall, in general, like a patriarchy literally does mean like male dominated, male led. This is why this nonsense happened. So you'll see this because we live in a patriarchy. You will see this stupid double standard where people will say, raise your daughter to be like this, 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 and this. But what about your son? Nobody talks about your son at all. Like, what I mean by that is, a dude will have a son and a daughter, right? A father, right? The son could go be a freaking man whore. It's a-okay. But when the daughter does it, it's oh no, bad, 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 bad. It's like, both are bad. So why is it that we're excusing the son to do it? Right? Example 2. With this hypersexualization that we are having in today's world of women, perpetrated by men, by the way, you have women who are encouraging it themselves to, yeah. However, the only reason why women are encouraging this is because men are allowing it. But we are bashing women for simply encouraging it when the root of the problem is still men. Guys, this is why we have stuff like OnlyFans. People, bro, I will never understand that logic, you know. People will bash OnlyFans model, and I've talked to so many people about this. People bash OnlyFans models and like all these people who, you know, do like cam work or, you know, like that type of stuff. But it's like, can you blame them? It's like, can you blame them? Because at the end of the day, it's still men who are allowing this to happen. You are bashing them for simply taking advantage of something that men have allowed. I can't blame women for that. And besides, it's like, who cares? It's their body. It's literally their body, their choice. I'm not a liberal. I am not a liberal. But literally, it's their body, their choice. I talked to a friend about this, and I'm like, dude, if you are in a position where you could easily just take advantage of something, right? And just live life easy, would you not do it? Would you not do it? Like, seriously, would you not do it? Like, bro, this is why it's like, okay, like, yes, there is moral repercussions of it. but still, it gets to the point where the amount of money that these OnlyFans models are making, and these people who do like stuff like OnlyFans, because there's different types of websites too, not just OnlyFans. OnlyFans is just the most popular one, of course, but you know, it just gets to the point where it's like, yeah, morally speaking, like, probably you shouldn't do it, but do you not see the amount of money that they're making from it? It gets to that point where it's like, okay, I can't really blame them anymore. I can't blame those OnlyFans models for doing that. I gotta blame the men for allowing this shit to happen. So seriously, literally, raise your damn sons properly. I always tell people this. People will say stuff like, this girl's father failed her. But nobody talks about how men fail their sons too. Fathers fail their sons too. Literally. This is why you got nonsense like male loneliness epidemic. This is why men are so weak today. Because fathers have failed their sons too, and nobody isn't raising their damn sons properly. Now, I'm not saying that, you shouldn't raise your daughters. You should. What I'm saying is more people need to raise their sons properly. Because at the end of the day, we still live in a male-dominated society. This is why we have stuff like OnlyFans like popping off and being enabled. This is why we have like women just acting the way that they act in the West. It's all men's fault. I could yap on and on about this, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna yap too much about this. But yeah, man, like this is why I literally tell people, like, dude, in a situation where a woman, I will usually defend women more than I defend men, because honestly, I kind of blame men for everything. Understandably so too. Like, I can't really blame women for a lot. I can't really blame like these OnlyFans models for taking an easy route to get money. It's like I can't blame them at all. Honestly, I blame the men for enabling that. It's like, bro, honestly, like, it's like, bro, go get that bread, queen. You know what I mean? It just gets to that point where it's just like, you go get that bread. Like, oh.
The Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser was the preeminent figure of leadership in the post-colonial Middle East. His solution to where the Arabs should go after the end of the caliphate and colonialism was socialism. Many others disagreed. Some would try nationalism, others constitutional monarchy, but modernization and openness were where most agreed upon. In many ways, many tried to copy Ataturk, from Egypt to Sudan to Yemen to Saudi Arabia to Iran. Today, the Middle East is often associated with religiously inspired terrorism, veiled women, bearded religious weirdos, religious bigotry, and a place to avoid if you are gay. But that was very different not too long ago. Beirut was known as the Paris of the Middle East, known for its nightclubs, bars, theaters, and even for its gay bars. Baghdad once had no veiled women to be found anywhere. Saudi Arabia used to have girls' schools. Iran was once one of the most secular nations in the Middle East. Afghanistan was the favorite tourism destination of hippies, famed for its high-quality cannabis. And Egypt used to be famous for its movie stars and nightclubs. From the 1940s to the 1960s, much of the Middle East tried to radically redefine itself. And then all of that collapsed into itself. And like all things in history, there isn't one reason for why, but several. Arab nationalism was humiliated during the Six-Day War, losing all its glitz and glamour. Arab socialism ended in economic failure and stagnation. Constitutional monarchs turned out to be authoritarian monarchs, brutalizing their people into submission. National unity gave way to religious sectarianism and tribalism, as different ethnic groups and religious groups were pitted up against each other. And there are 8 events in particular that stand out, as they show where the Middle East would be heading next. In 1970, Hafiz al-Assad led a purge of the country's political elite, abandoned the country's previous socialist course, and consolidated power within a small sectarian elite of Alawites in sectarian alliance with Shias against Sunnis. In 1975, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who had driven an extensive program for modernizing Saudi Arabia, was assassinated by an Islamist. The reason was that the king had legalized television and had cracked down against Islamist protest against modernization, which the assassin had deemed as heretical. Also in 1975,
that is wild.
The various religious and ethnic groups of Lebanon, leading to a collapse of the multicultural social cohesion that would end with sectarian religious groups and fundamentalists seizing power. In 1976, Zia-ul-Haq led a coup against the socialist government of Pakistan, established a military dictatorship, and embarked on an extensive program of Islamizing society by importing Wahhabi fanatics from Arab countries. In 1979, a group of armed Islamists seized and occupied the Grand Mosque in Mecca, holding thousands of hostages as they demanded a return to Islamic law, the subjugation of unbelievers, and the abolition of television. Also in 1979, the brutal regime of the Iranian Shah came to an end at the hands of a popular revolt that would lead to a rise of an Islamic state. Also in 1979, the Iraqi Vice President Saddam Hussein, similar to what had happened in Syria at the start of the decade, organized a coup and purge that consolidated power within his inner circle of a Sunni Muslim clan, which would lead to an erosion of secularism and an increasing.
Sorry, I noticed the quality kind of looked weird.
And in 1981, the last leader of the Arab socialist era, the president of Egypt, Anwar al-Sadat, was assassinated by a group of Islamists as punishment for agreeing to peace with Israel. His successor, Hosni Mubarak, would put the final nail into the coffin of Arab socialism. It is important not to fall into a deterministic trap when looking at the current state of the Middle East, the kind of thought process where one concludes that that place and the people living in it have always simply been like this and are doomed to forever being religious fundamentalists and reactionary authoritarians. Because that is simply not true. Islamism and the very notion of modern Islamist theocracy are barely a century old, but they also did not appear out of nowhere. The same year that Ataturk dismantled the caliphate, one of the binding institutions of Islamic societies around the world, an Egyptian Sunni cleric called Hassan al-Banna commented that
every rebirth that is not based on our faith diverges from the path of truth. It must therefore be resisted by all means, so it can be annihilated.
And founded the Muslim Brotherhood. He would be murdered 10 years later, but it is his writings that formed the foundations of modern Islamist movements from Morocco to Indonesia. Before they came back into the public during the 1970s, they spent half a century in self-imposed exile and isolation. Much like the religious conservative Turks of eastern Anatolia, they were politically closed off and reclusive. They had divergent ideas and differences, but were also well connected, from Shia clerics building networks reaching from Lebanon to Syria to Iraq and Iran, to Wahhabist networks of mosques and clerics stretching from Morocco through Saudi Arabia to Pakistan and Indonesia. They all spent those decades out of sight, building the Islamist political power structures that we know today, waiting for the moment they could finally resurface, which came in the late 1970s. But this is not part of Turkey's story, and there's a reason why I bring this up. I cannot emphasize enough how vastly different Turkish Islamism is from Islamism in Arab and other Muslim societies. Why? Well, remember, Turkey had spent almost half a century purposefully disconnecting itself from the Islamic world. It pursued integration into the Western geopolitical sphere with Europe and North America. Adding to that, all cultural ties to other Islamic countries were mostly cut. Turkey's relationship to her Arab neighbors...
We are finally talking about Turkey, bro.
Iraq,
I forgot this video was about Turkey.
And at the brink of war at some point, but more on that later. And all other Turkic countries were outside of her sphere of influence, as they were all under the Soviet Union. Devout Turkish Muslims were not just politically isolated and removed from the general public discourse on culture and politics in their homeland, they were also isolated and separated from their wider Muslim world. They were on their own, and as such, Turkish Islamism, but also Turkish Islam, started to evolve on its own, separate from others into something that is somewhat different. When Said Nursi wrote his reform pieces, he still advocated for a unified Islamic state, but the kernel of his writings was about resolving the conflict between religion and modernity, how concessions by the religious were required and democracy to be accepted, how religion can still find a place in the modern world. The conversation that Islamists within the remaining Islamic world had was very different. It mainly revolved around a rebellion against the modern world, how society can turn back the clock into previous centuries and how the modern secular world could be destroyed. Ömer Özsoy is a Turkish Islamic theologian and professor who in his pieces wrote that only 10% of the Quran are actual dictates and rules for individuals or societies, and that most of the Islamic laws and rules implemented throughout Islamic societies in the world are merely the result of historic interpretations throughout the centuries. This, of course, is open to interpretation and how much this may actually be the case, but nevertheless, Özsoy, with his writings on the democratization of Islam, as well as other Turkish reform theologians like Mehmet Pachachi, Adil Çiftçi, and Ilhami Güler, represents something special because they were only able to do so within a society that would allow such conversations to happen. In comparison, Nasser Hamid Abu Said, an Egyptian theologian who wrote similar texts, was arrested, charged with apostasy, divorced from his wife by the state, and eventually had to flee to the Netherlands. Turkey was a place where the religious may have been ostracized and kept out of the socio-political public conversation, a place where the religious had to stay isolated in Anatolia, but it was a place where conversation could take place. What evolved from this conversation was a set of multiple political Islamic sets of beliefs, practices, and ideologies. Pluralism started to arrive in the East, especially throughout the late 1970s, and what it produced varied greatly, especially from how Islam is practiced elsewhere and can also be seen abroad. Visit the Islamic graveyard in Cologne and you will be able to differentiate the graves of Arab immigrants from Turkish immigrants, because the Turks leave red candles at the graves. This is a Catholic practice, but Turkish immigrants in Germany simply adopted it from their neighbors. If you ever travel to Turkey, you might notice that at old Greek Orthodox pilgrimage sites, Turkish Muslims often take the pilgrimage up the mountains to receive blessings from Christian priests and monks, a religious practice that many simply adopted from their Greek neighbors and continued even after the Greeks were gone. This cross-religious interaction is barely seen between religious communities of other majority Muslim countries. And if you are German, Dutch or Austrian, free countries with large Turkish communities, you may have also at one point in your life been invited to attend the Islamic wedding of a friend who is a Turkish immigrant or descendant of Turkish immigrants. This astounded English and French friends whenever I tell them, because in their Muslim communities, which are mainly of Pakistani and Arab origin, non-Muslims are close to never invited to such festivities, as it would be a large religious taboo. The Turkish majority in the Muslim community is also a reason why Germany had less of an Islamist terrorism problem than other European countries, and Turkey itself has had less Islamist terrorist attacks than even many a European country. That is because
I'm thinking about it right now. How old is this video again? I think this video is a couple years old actually, so I don't know. Europe right now, I think like the whole migrant crisis is happening in Europe right now. I mean, it's just causing a lot of problems in general. Like in like every country that has a big influx of those migrants, it's causing a lot of problems. So
because Wahhabism, the Sunni Islamic doctrine of faith that justifies many such attacks, is not widespread in Turkey and is even rejected by most Turks. This goes so far that Turks, be they in Turkey, Germany, Austria or the Netherlands, will not go to mosques where the imam is an Arab, and certainly not if he is a Wahhabi. Turks would for most see Wahhabism as foreign nonsense or even as a foreign Arab attempt at undermining their community. Religion in Turkey was able to evolve free from the strict orthodoxy that is so widespread across Arab countries. And even though most Turks remain Sunni Muslims, they are by and large distant from the ultra-conservative and mainly Arab notions of returning to basic social structures and tribal rules of the 7th century. Turkish Islamism, on the other hand, can be almost compared to the nostalgia that some very conservative British people have for the British Empire. In particular, the 16th century is seen as the golden age of not just the Turkish people, but of Islam itself. Compared to the reach and power of the Ottomans, who are those Arabs and why should we listen to them on how to build our society? A return to a religious golden age to Turkish Islamists doesn't mean a return to the 6th century of Arab tribalism, but a social return to the golden days of the Ottoman Empire. The strict and all-encompassing secularism of the Turkish state also furthered another unique political development. The strict laws and regulations to separate religion and state were not just enforced upon Muslims, but also upon Christians and Jews. Those may have had more political and economic freedoms in Turkey than in most other Muslim countries, but their religious freedoms were at times even more severely restricted than the religious freedoms that they would have had in Arab countries. Abandoned Christian churches were often used by the Turkish army as target practice for artillery, and in this situation, while in most Arab countries
That's whoa. Okay.
movements that claimed the role of being the protectors of religious minorities from Islamic bigotry, in Turkey it was Islamists who throughout the 70s and 80s claimed and earned the role of being the protectors of Christians as they stood up for their religious liberties against a secular state. Two distinct political movements emerged during the late 70s and early 80s. A radical branch of Islamists, populists, campaigning on promises of welfare for the poor, railing against corruption and elites, anti-Semitic undertones, and demanding a return to Sharia, led by Necmettin Erbakan. A difference between this extreme Islamist movement and Islamist movements throughout the Middle East is that despite its radical positions, it never resorted to outright violence or terrorism. It remained within the boundaries of the democratic institutions of the state. It is by and large more comparable with right-wing populist parties in Europe, and it spent almost the entirety of the 1980s in political irrelevance. Necmettin Erbakan founded his National Salvation Party in the 1970s and organized his rallies demanding that the Hagia Sophia be used as a mosque again, but he was throughout most of the 70s and 80s seen as a weird curiosity or even just as a clown. Nobody to be taken seriously, and even less cared for his deputy, some guy from the slums called Erdogan.
Yo, why Erdogan low-key look like a... he low-key... no homo, low-key? He kind of low-key look fine, bruh.
Islamist politician came to shine during the 80s, as the army welcomed them into the open as an ally against communism. The most famous of which was to be Fethullah Gülen, an Islamic preacher who took inspiration from the newly developing Christian right that developed in the United States at the same time. Gülen created the Gülen movement, an organization of various Islamic schools that were vastly different than the ones you would find financed by Saudi Arabia. No bearded weirdos raising kids to be bearded weirdos by constantly making them read the Quran over and over and over again, but schools that were in appearance and curriculum modern, no gender segregation, and a focus on education in secular matters such as science and the humanities. The Gülen movement still preached religious, conservative, social values, but encouraged its members to abide by secular rules, to shave their beards off, to wear suits and ties, that women didn't have to necessarily wear the veil, to go seek out higher education, especially in law and finance, and to go out and found a business. What Gülen and many like him wanted to create was a new, modern Islamic conservative movement, not grounded in fundamentalism, but in a socially conservative tradition more comparable to American religious conservative social movements. Whilst the Arab Islamist may appear to you in beard and tawab, angrily rambling about the indecency of unveiled women, the Turkish Islamist gradually changed into suit and tie. He became a moderately wealthy and successful owner of a small business, or a doctor, or a successful criminal defense lawyer, who might even reject the label of an Islamist entirely and would just call himself a conservative. Don't overthrow the system, but become part of it, to then maybe make the changes that you wish to implement. Through a gradual process, Islam returned into Turkey's politics throughout the 1980s, but that process was mainly slow and wouldn't fully come to fruition into actual political power until the 1990s. Politically, the 1980s would be dominated by someone else. Turgut Özal. He belonged to the first generation of Republic-born, highly educated conservatives. An electrical engineer with a diploma from Istanbul, he would travel to the United States to receive further education in electrical engineering. Electrical infrastructure management are more crucial for his future political career in business management. His time in the United
Business management. Holy shit. Business man. Yo, that's the first time I heard that degree actually being used. Yo, because business management is like a meme degree. I mean, it's not completely bad, but people like to make fun of freaking business management. Be like, oh, business management. Freaking oh, you're not gonna get any jobs with business management. I don't even know what the hell business management people do. That is the genuine first time I heard a freaking political figure having this degree and actually freaking having a career out of it. That's insane.
States exposed him to the market ideas that drove economic policy and success within the United States, something that he would study and remember. After returning home to Turkey, he would take a leading role as a state bureaucrat in the electrification of the country, which garnered him a reputation as an incorruptible man of hard work who could get the task he faced done. He would spend the 1970s working for various private companies, building up further a reputation as a reliable business manager and economist that would eventually get him a job at the World Bank overseeing infrastructure development funds and loans right up to 1980. After the coup of 1980, the army wanted to resolve a problem that had plagued the country since Menderes, the continuing economic turmoil. The issues created by the large agriculture industry had not been resolved. The country still had problems providing its own steady supply of basic food because of the heavily export-orientated agriculture industry. Inflation kept rising and rising as the Turkish lira lost more and more of its value. By the 1970s, the average Turk's spending power collapsed as prices soared. The wages of average Turks had collapsed by half, and as the Germans stopped their labor import program in 1973, unemployment started rising again. The army turned to Turgut Özal. He was appointed deputy prime minister under the provisional military government and given what must have seemed to be an almost impossible task of fixing an economy that had been broken for almost 20 years. Meanwhile, the army made drastic changes to the country's constitution that would impact the country to this day. A 10% hurdle was introduced for all political parties. If a party didn't achieve at least 10% in an election, it would remain out of parliament. This was done in hope that it would keep the far left, the far right, the Islamists and the Kurds out of parliament and consequently out of the public eye and political conversation. Additionally, the Islamic faith was made a mandatory part of the school curriculum in an effort to clamp down on communism as various Islamic foundations and organizations received state support. After that, in 1983, they called for an election to hand governance back into civilian hands. Turgut Özal consequently founded the Motherland Party, a conservative centre-right political party, campaigned on the promise of fixing the Turkish economy and got elected. He deregulated the financial market and provided incentives for international as well as Turkish banks to conduct more business in Turkey. The result of this was a substantial amount of capital was moved to Turkey. He reduced taxes and cut red tape in several industry sectors, making it easier to open and do business. All these reforms were part and parcel of a global trend in a similar economic policy direction. But his greatest economic success came when he opened up the country's hotel and service sector and invited and incentivized investors and hotel owners to build a tourism industry. This is something you may be familiar with if you are European, but less if you are from elsewhere. Turkey today is one of the largest tourism destinations in the world. Its white beaches, surrounded by crystal blue water and dotted with ancient Greek ruins, being a sight that many a European are familiar with. And that massive and popular tourism destination started being built during the 1980s. It employs at least 2 million people within the service sector, not counting related jobs created in other sectors. The total value of the sector switches with the holiday seasons and the location's popularity between $5 billion to $7 billion to even $14 billion in the second quarter of 2019. As millions of Europeans flood the Turkish beaches each summer and winter, Ozal managed to resolve many of the country's economic issues and is consequently to this day revered by many Turks as one of the best prime ministers the country has ever had. He created a middle class, mostly residing within the coastline, but also of seasonal Anatolian workers in the tourism sector. He brought substantial capital to the country. He made the country's voice more important on the international stage as he became an increasingly respected leader internationally. He also engaged Turkey in a far more active foreign policy than any of his predecessors. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, he embarked on the foreign policy of reintegrating the newly emergent independent Turkic countries into a Turkish sphere of influence outside of Russian influence. He built deepening economic ties within Far East Asian countries, in particular with Malaysia.
Pretty smart.
And became the first serving Turkish prime minister to go on Hajj to Mecca, thereby cautiously rebuilding Turkish ties into Arab countries. But most significantly was that he created a class of wealthy business owners within Turkish society that would become an elite within itself. The previous social elites had mostly been bureaucrats and army officers who had worked their way up to power and influence through the state apparatus of the republic. Now, Turkey had wealthy business elites that gained social influence, wealth and power in an increasingly expanding private sector. These owners of hotels, construction companies, banks and other would in the future play a significant role in Turkish politics as well as become the backbone of the new democratic Islamic conservative movement that Ozal helped create. From him also stems the somewhat famous quote,
"The state is secular, the nation is not,"
which in the West is often interpreted as an admission of defeat of the secular republic. However, it is meant in the exact opposite way. Ozal
That's how I interpreted that too. Like, what?
was fully aware that many conservative voters did not agree with the separation of religion and state, yet he was determined to underline that the new Turkish religious conservative would also not challenge that separation and be first and foremost committed to democracy. His popularity increased so much that when his terms as prime minister came to an end, he became the first president of the republic who was not an army general.
Yo,
His terms
wow.
did not come without
Wow.
problems and failures. Ozal was himself half Kurdish and determined to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict with the Kurds throughout the 1980s, and that
You want to hear a story? Bro, so at my old job, right? There's this Kurdish guy who walked in the store and he had a Kurdistan shirt. This happened quite a bit ago. I was like, I'm just gonna save this story for one of my videos that talks about freaking the Kurds. And I looked at him and I just looked at him and I just said, "Free Kurdistan." You know the phrase, "Free Kurdistan." So I just looked at him. I just said, "Oh, free Kurdistan," right? And bro, this dude, bro, he looks at me and he was like on the phone too, right? He's like, then he stops talking to the person on the phone and he's like, "You know Kurdistan?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Yeah, I know what Kurdistan is." And he's like, "You know Kurdistan?" He keeps saying that over and over. And then he walks up to me and then he like dabs me up and then hugs me. And I'm not even kidding. He literally starts crying, literally crying. He's like, "Oh my God." He's like, thank you so much." Literally like just literally sobbing, bro. Like, I'm not laughing at him. I'm not laughing at him or anything, but I'm like, yo, that's insane, bro. It literally just freaking hugged me and just started just crying in my shoulder, just thanking me for acknowledging freaking Kurdistan. That is, I was like, wow, that's. I mean, I looked at him and I was like, yeah, man, you guys been through a lot. Like, yeah, I wish the best for you people,
that
honestly.
failed.
Which is, although I did heard the PKK kind of like decided to stop fighting, if I'm not mistaken. So
The army was determined to end that conflict by military means, but another problem also hampered all attempts to make peace. In Syria, governing power had fallen almost completely into the hands of the ruthless Assad family, who dreamt of a greater Syria, stretching from the Sinai Peninsula through Lebanon and into large parts of Anatolia. To achieve such, the Assads would spend much of their time in power destabilizing their neighbors as much as they could, including Turkey, where they saw the Kurds as the best vehicle to do so. Starting in the 1970s, the Syrian government built an extensive network providing training, weapons, explosives, and bases for Kurdish terror groups, and then smuggling them across the border. The Turkish government and army mistakenly believed that the Soviets were behind it all, and it took them a long time to figure out that it was Assad's Syria, which would extremely sour relations between Turkey and Syria for decades to come, and really even to this day.
bro, poor USSR. Oh my goodness, poor Soviet Union getting blamed for something that it didn't do.
Many abroad
Wow.
realistically viewed Turgut Özal as the democratizer of Islam, the first to establish a democratic conservative Islamic movement that could act and work within the boundaries of a secular democracy. And even though this made him many friends, it also increasingly made him a lot of enemies. The army, who had helped and supported people like him when the decade began, viewed him with increasing suspicion. So did the secular center-left, which also disapproved of his economic liberalizations. The far right couldn't stand him, and the religious populist right, which gained more and more influence as the decade came to a close, also framed him as a corrupt phony who sold out on true Islamic virtues. However, none of his enemies could change his enormous popularity amongst common Turks. As such, it came as a shock when he suddenly died in office at the age of 65. Suspicions were voiced at the time on the mysterious circumstances of his death, but the state prevented any investigations. 2 decades later, his body was exhumed for an autopsy, which found that he had indeed been poisoned.
Wow.
Who was responsible is something that we will probably never know.
Wow. What a G, bro. What a G, and that happens. And this guy is basically Ataturk 2.0, bruh. They should call him Little Ataturk, honestly. Well-deserved nickname, Little Ataturk, bruh. Anyways, you made it all the way here. Make sure you like and subscribe. If you're new to my channel, you know, you like my reactions, you got any videos like this that you want me to react to, you know, you could comment it in the comments below. Eventually I'll do it. You know, if you want your comments to be replied to with a lot more priority, you want your suggestions to be done faster, and a whole bunch of other perks that I'm too lazy to explain, go check out my channel membership for 99 cents a month. Like I said, as we get more members, I will expand the perks that people get. But yeah, go check out my other Turkey reactions on my channel, man. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.